Night falls over Europe, and the map hums with electric veins. Warsaw, Berlin, London, while the Black Sea lies like a sheet of dark glass. In that darkness, a question. What if Britain chose not just to support Ukraine, but to shock the war into a new trajectory?
The Defence Secretary says the UK is preparing for the possible deployment of British troops to Ukraine in support of any agreement. That Britain wanted to play a key role in Ukraine's future.
Not with one silver bullet, but with a synchronized jolt. Troops in blue helmets where it matters. Drones by the tens of thousands. Air defenses that flip the cost curve. Factories that hum like a second heartbeat, and diplomacy that writes the rules of the morning after. Suppose that sounds dramatic. Good. Wars are decided by those willing to change the tempo. And Britain, of all countries, knows how to do tempo. Think of this as a controlled surge. A British-French reassurance force ready to deploy the day a ceasefire is inked. An industrial sprint that saturates the skies with interceptors and floods depots with 155mm shells. Maritime trials that prove swarming, uncrewed boats can police sea lanes from hundreds of miles away. And a diplomatic coalition, headquartered in Paris hand in glove with London, that lays down rails for a peace that doesn't crumble at the first probe. This is not about marching on Moscow. It's about rigging the board so the obvious move for the Kremlin is the one it hates most. Not today. Context first. Since 2022, the UK has shifted from emergency deliveries to something more architectural, training tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers at home under Operation Interflex. London quietly built muscles that last.
The British Army has begun training 10,000 Ukrainian recruits into frontline soldiers at 4 bases across England.
Instructors, ranges, curricula, and a pipeline of recruits who arrive as civilians and leave as cohesive units, ready for a modern battlefield of sensors, drones, and long-range fires. 3 years on, that pipeline has trained well over 50,000 Ukrainians, and keeps stretching. Numbers are dry until you picture the faces. Platoon leaders who can plan fires, sappers who can outthink Russian mines, drone operators who can make a $400 quadcopter do a $40,000 job. That's the hidden advantage. Readiness you can't see on a map. Then London made it political. In February 2025, the government committed to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence by 2027, the largest sustained increase since the Cold War, and set an ambition for 3% in the next parliament, subject to economic conditions. It's a sentence that feels like bookkeeping until you translate it. More shells, more air defense, more industry, more leverage. In a Europe that suddenly has to ensure itself, money is strategy. Now the headline move, the one that would make Moscow in half the chancelleries of Europe sit forward. Britain and France have built a coalition of the willing, designed to transform political will into operational steel. It's not NATO's Article 5 wrapped in a different font. It's a European reassurance force that would move in after a ceasefire to stabilize critical sites, run air policing, clear mines, secure corridors, and put a professional tripwire where Russia expects vacuum. The coalition has a permanent headquarters in Paris and plans for a coordination cell in Kyiv. Command structures are being finalized. The concept is to be present fast, in enough weight, with rules of engagement that deter without provoking. If that sounds like threading a needle at 600 knots, yes, but it's the kind of needle Europe must thread. How large? Public briefings and informed analysis point to a sizable multinational force, tens of countries contributing, structured with land, sea, air, regeneration, and reconstruction elements. Depending on the political appetite and the threat picture, a British-French backbone could lead a formation in the low 5 digits, rotating in the day a ceasefire holds. The choreography is deliberate. A French general first, then the UK, with air policing and maritime security built in from the start. All of that signals not escalation, but insurance. It tells Moscow that testing the peace is a choice with visible consequences. If you appreciate sourced, on-the-ground analysis that connects policy choices to battlefield effects, hit subscribe. It keeps this kind of deep dive on your feed and out of the algorithmic abyss. If you're already subbed, A like right now tells YouTube not to bury thoughtful content under 10-second hot takes. Back to the war. Air defence first, because nothing else works without a survivable sky. Britain's ground-launched ASRAAM, better known in Ukraine as the Raven system, has quietly become a workhorse. Built around twin rails on a Supercat truck, guided by a compact EO suite, Raven fires a fighter missile at drones, cruise missiles and low-flying aircraft with a brutal efficiency that Ukrainian operators call game-changing. By May 2025, 8 Ravens were in service. 5 more were queued for delivery, and the UK announced 350 additional ASRAAMs, funded pointedly by interest on frozen Russian assets. The message is as elegant as it is infuriating for the Kremlin. You pay for the missiles that shoot down your drones. If Raven is the scalpel, Martlet, the lightweight multi-role missile, is the fast, cheap surgical blade for the near-fight. In October 2025, the UK delivered hundreds of Martlets 5 months ahead of schedule, a quiet acceleration that helps Ukraine swat Shaheeds and harass helicopters without emptying magazines meant for bigger threats. Designed and built in Belfast, the missile went from British test ranges to Ukrainian killcams in a strategic blink. Logistics becomes deterrence when your partner can refill you faster than the enemy can deplete you. But the real British wager is quantity. In June 2025, London committed to deliver 100,000 drones by April 2026, an order of magnitude jump powered by a £350 million initiative that treats drones as the new artillery. Mass matters, cost curves matter, and a drone wall is both tactic and doctrine. That wasn't a press release number. Within months, deliveries surged into the tens of thousands, and the UK co-led a drone capability coalition, contracting 30,000 more platforms to keep the flow relentless. In a war where a $1,000 quad can blind a $10 million tank, cheap is a weapon. Enter the idea that could flip Russia's nightly economy of terror. Interceptor drones, mass-produced. Project Octopus, the UK-Ukraine plan to co-produce thousands of small interceptors per month, aims to meet Shaheeds with swarms that cost a fraction to field and a fraction to fire. Reports through autumn 2025 describe a ramp toward roughly 2,000 interceptors monthly, built in Britain to a Ukrainian design, with test batches already committed and a formal tech-sharing agreement inked in London. If you can shoot a $40,000 Shahed out of the sky with something that costs 1/10, and you can do it all night, the attacker runs out of incentives before you run out of interceptors. That's not just tactics. That's economics with a warhead. And if you're still watching, first, you're our people. Second, drop drone wall in the comments so we know to build a follow-up episode on the Octopus production line, how it spins up, who's building what, and how those interceptors integrate with Raven, guns, and EW. Comments shape what we tackle next, and yes, we actually read them. Now to the sea, where Britain is doing something quietly radical. London and Oslo co-lead the Maritime Capability Coalition for Ukraine. Minehunters, boats, drones, training, and a plan to make rivers and littorals not just passable, but policed. 2 stand-down-class minehunters have already transferred. Funding packages keep the water clear and the grain moving. This matters because a fragile Black Sea corridor is a strategic hinge. Keep it open, and Ukraine can breathe economically. Let it close, and the war's pressure multiplies everywhere. At the cutting edge, the Royal Navy just trialled a pack of uncrewed Rattler boats, escorting warships off Scotland, controlled from 500 miles away in Portsmouth. Call it a remote wolf pack. 7-meter RIB-based USVs, sensors streaming back over long-range networks, operators riding herd from the experimental ship XV Patrick Blackett. The practical lesson is simple and scary for any adversary with vulnerable logistics. If you can patrol, shadow, and screen from over the horizon with a handful of fast-learning robots, you can make harassment cheap and presence constant. Independent reporting and images confirm the milestone. For a navy, that's doctrine being written in real time. There's more. A New Zealand firm, SYOS Aerospace has handed over Rattler-class USVs to Ukraine and demonstrated remote control from Portsmouth. Taken together with Kyiv's homegrown Sea Baby and Magura craft, the Black Sea looks less like a sanctuary and more like a lab. The Russians don't have to lose many ships to lose initiative. Sometimes, staying in port is the defeat. Zoom back to the air defense arms race and the quiet revolution of radio waves and lines of code. In April 2025, the British Army publicly trialled a radio frequency directed energy weapon that neutralized over 100 drones across multiple engagements, including 2 swarms in a single shot cycle. Cost per effect? Pennies. That's not jamming, that's frying. Pair that with ongoing UK trials of crewed-uncrewed teaming in the Typhoon Force, synthetic for now, real world in the pipeline, and you see a force trying to buy mass in software, not just steel. It's where Britain's defense sector shines, taking a lesson from the front and iterating in months, not years. Back to the money and the factories. Because Deterrence is built in fluorescent light, BAE Systems has retooled UK munitions production, bringing a new explosive filling facility online in South Wales and promising a 16-fold jump in 155mm shell output compared to 2 years ago. The goal is strategic autonomy for propellants and energetics, redundancy in supply lines, and volume that doesn't buckle when demand spikes. Put less romantically, if you plan to win long wars, you need boring reliability in bulk. Britain is rediscovering the beauty of boring. The industrial coupling with Ukraine is the other half of that story. BAE opened a legal entity in Kiev to localize repair and, ultimately, production. London has used export finance and specialized funds to de-risk contracts, and Made in Ukraine has expanded from buzzword to procurement line. Each joint venture is a rivet in a bridge that lets capability cross borders when politics wobbles. That's how you move from aid to alliance by factory. What about long-range strike? The thing that blunts Russian logistics and punishes deep targets.
Ukraine is now using British Storm Shadow missiles against Russia.
Britain keeps topping up Ukraine's stock of Storm Shadow cruise missiles, even as allies argue over ranges and red lines. The logic is simple: break the enemy's logistics, and the front line breathes. In early November 2025,
the United Kingdom has confirmed that it is supplying Ukraine with multiple Storm Shadow cruise missiles.
Media reported a fresh tranche of Storm Shadows delivered ahead of winter, keeping pressure on depots, shipyards, and bridges the Kremlin once considered untouchable. Precision buys you choice, choice buys you time, time wins wars. Now stitch the strands together, and the shock comes into focus. First, presence. If a British-French reassurance force steps onto Ukrainian soil the day the guns go quiet, the peace has a spine. Air policing, maritime security, logistics hubs, and training cadres don't just fill space. They impose costs on any opportunistic lunge. That turns maybe we probe here into maybe we keep our powder dry. The Paris HQ and the planned Kiev cell aren't symbolism. They're command and control that make fast decisions possible when fast matters. Second, saturation. 100,000 drones by April 2026, plus the drone capability coalition's tens of thousands more, isn't a headline. It's a change to the operating system. Add Raven batteries roaming like goalkeepers, martlets stacked in crates, and an octopus line churning interceptors by the thousand, and you've inverted the economics of the sky. When the defender spends less per kill than the attacker spends per launch, the attacker tires first. That's how you break campaigns built on attrition. Third, sea denial on the cheap. You don't have to match the Black Sea fleet ship for ship if you can make the approaches miserable. Maritime drones, aggressive mine hunting, and riverine policing complicate every Russian logistics line from Sevastopol to the Danube Delta. The Royal Navy's remote Rattler escort drill isn't theatre. It's rehearsal for a world where a handful of USVs can stretch a coastline's nervous system. And if allies share platforms and playbooks with Ukraine, those lessons cross the surf fast. Fourth, factories first. A shell plant that can surge, an explosives line that isn't hostage to a single supplier, a British entity in Kyiv that can repair and produce. This is how you make deterrence durable. The Kremlin learns to fear pipelines, not pauses. There are risks. A reassurance force would be unprecedented and politically delicate. Some European partners will be cautious. Moscow will angle for propaganda wins. And Britain's army, lean after years of trimming, would have to balance commitments across a tight manning and logistics map. But compare that to the alternative. A ceasefire held together by hope and weather. History is harsh to those who outsource their peace to luck. Let's get specific on how the boots part could work without tumbling into escalation. Picture a British, French-led multinational division with sector responsibilities rather than a single monolithic footprint. Air policing detachments rotate through Ukrainian airspace under strict rules. Deterrent by presence, not combat patrols looking for a fight. Maritime teams anchor mine clearing in corridors that keep trade flowing. Logistics brigades run depots and railheads that free Ukrainian brigades to rest and refit. Trainers and liaison officers bind the force into Ukrainian command networks. That design signals restraint and seriousness at the same time. It's not a tripwire you can ignore. It's a tripwire that phones your boss.
Meanwhile, the UK's training machine doesn't pause just because cameras pan to parades. Interflex keeps turning recruits into small unit leaders who can employ drones, integrate fire support, and fight under EW pressure. The curriculum has expanded. The cohorts keep coming. Training isn't glamorous, but it's why units hold under pressure and counterpunch when they should be pinned. If there's a British superpower in this war, it might just be patience applied to process. Let's also talk about the silent partner in every Ukrainian success: data. AI-enabled targeting, route deconfliction, sensor fusion. None of it makes a good hero shot. All of it saves lives. British firms have leaned into synthetic environments and autonomy trials that aim to give crewed jets loyal wingmen and ground units swarms that scout, jam, and strike without needing a colonel's permission for every move. That's the shift. From hardware that asks for help to software that offers it. So what makes Britain's option truly shocking? It isn't that one thing is new, it's that everything is synchronized. Diplomats writing plans they can hand to colonels in a week. Factories spinning out missiles and shells on timelines that embarrass the peacetime past. Drones delivered in numbers that make statistics feel like special effects. A reassurance force that turns a ceasefire into a contract. Shock is a property of timing. Britain's move is to make everything land together. By the way, if you've been with us this far, you're exactly why this channel exists. Tell us in the comments which piece to deep dive next. Raven's kill chain, Octopus's production tempo, or the Paris HQ's command architecture. And hit the bell. We publish when the story's real, not when the cycle demands it.
A quick detour to economics, because budgets are battlefields. Chancellors don't sign off on missiles and drones to feel tough. They sign to make deterrence cheaper than aggression. In March 2025, the Treasury topped up defense with a technology push. Drones, AI, innovation funds that turns British money into Ukrainian survivability and European resilience. Weapons that cost cents per shot against threats that cost thousands per launch. That's a budgetary trap for any attacker who thinks time is their friend. Ukraine's part in this is massive and immediate. Kyiv isn't waiting for gifts. It's building an industrial base that can out-adapt the enemy. Britain's job is to bolt itself to that base. Co-production, export finance, shared IP. So that when the battlefield says, we need X, the answer isn't, we'll ask Congress, it's, we'll turn on the line. That's what the tech-sharing agreement around Octopus formalized. Not charity, integration. Meanwhile, on the tactical edge, the British kit already in theatre keeps altering the day-to-day. Raven batteries redeploy on short notice to cover power nodes or bridge crossings. Martlets ride shotgun with mobile air defense teams hunting low targets. Storm Shadows crack open depots that feed Russian offensives months later. And soon, if the ramp holds, interceptors from Octopus will start treating incoming Shaheds like airborne clay pigeons. It's not spectacular when it works. It's quiet. That's the sound of infrastructure not being on fire. People think Britain's brand is tea, rain, and a talent for polite lines. But in defense circles, the brand is more like sprint in public with prototypes while quietly writing doctrine at tea time. The Rattler trial? Very British. Remote escort of warships from a desk in Portsmouth.
Next, they'll apologize to the drones for making them work a bank holiday. The point is, innovation here is cultural. It's iterative, slightly cheeky, and surprisingly fast. Strategically, where does this land by mid-2026 if Britain executes? A ceasefire holds because trying to break it means running into European troops with credible ROE, protected skies, and a sea corridor that bites. The Ukrainian economy starts climbing because ports move grain under a mine-swept umbrella, and power stations stay online under a drone wall. Russian planners stare at cost curves that trend the wrong way. A defended sky where every $40,000 Shahed meets a $4,000 headache. A coastline where US fees make refueling feel like roulette. And a hinterland where long-range strikes keep the rear nervous. You don't always beat an opponent by hitting harder. Sometimes you make every hit cost them more than they can afford. This isn't risk-free. A reassurance force is a propaganda target. The UK must be brutal about force protection, communications discipline, and clarity of mission. It must be honest at home. Stability costs, and we're paying now so we don't pay more later. It must be tight with France because a British-French political spine is the difference between a coalition and a calendar. And it must be relentless with industry because you can't surge factories you never built. All doable, none automatic. One more note on psychology, the underrated artillery of strategy. If Ukrainian families see European uniforms guarding substations and railheads, they see a future worth staying for. If Russian officers see European sectors bristling with sensors and quick reaction teams, they see pain for any shortcut. If Allied capitals see a British-French machine that actually delivers, they stop drafting communiques and start drafting budget lines. That's what shocking means here, a sudden shift from talking to doing. Let's grind through a few vignettes to make this tangible. Dawn near Odessa. A convoy pushes grain along a corridor patrolled by uncrewed boats that relay sensor feeds over a network the Russians can't easily blind. A Merlin helicopter shuttles overhead. A Rattler pack rides shotgun at standoff. On the horizon, a mine-hunting team clears a suspicious lane segment. Behind them, a British advisor watches a Ukrainian crew run the drill with muscle memory that wasn't there last year. It's not a set piece, it's a routine. This is how trade resumes under a thin but reliable shield. Night over Kharkiv's grid. A Raven team on a Supercat idles in the dark. Thermals up, controllers in hand. The alert pings, inbound. Shaheds at speed. The EO turret locks, the missile climbs, and another drone becomes debris. Across town, an improvised Octopus interceptor. Ukrainian design, British production. Angles into a head-on kill. Nobody cheers. They just tally and reposition. The point is not perfection, it's persistence. That's what wins the air war you don't see on TikTok. Afternoon on a training range in the UK. Interflex instructors run a new cohort through small unit tactics under EW pressure. Drones buzzing like angry bees. A young platoon leader checks a tablet, coordinates a fire plan, and calls a shift to a flanking maneuver under a drone screen. It's not glamorous. It's 1,000 reps until the right move is the normal move. Then they rotate home, where the real test starts. Evening in a cabinet room. Budget binders, threat maps, and a summary of the Paris HQ's tasking for the next quarter. The question isn't do we care, it's do we care enough to align money, metal, and mandate. That's Britain's bet. And the thing about bets is that you place them before the dice stop rolling. If you're thinking this sounds like Britain taking a leadership role even if Washington is distracted, you're not wrong. The coalition concept was designed for precisely that contingency. Europe acting as a security producer, with the UK and France as the engine room and helm. When the US leans in, the ship moves faster. When it leans back, the ship still moves. That's a grown-up strategy. A word on escalation, because that specter hovers over everything. The plan's design choices, post-ceasefire presence, clear ROE, sector-based missions, emphasis on air policing and maritime security are about imposing credibility without inviting miscalculation. Deterrence works when your opponent believes you'll do exactly what you said, no more and no less. That's why clarity beats bluster. And a word on culture, because Britain's edge often hides there. A defence ecosystem that tolerates prototypes in public and good enough yesterday can feel messy. But it's what lets Raven go from concept to shooting war fast. It's what lets a remote USV escort happen in months, not years. It's what fuels a directed energy demo that burns a swarm for cents. In a conflict that punishes delay, messy can look like mastery.
So, the question we opened with, what's the shocking way Britain could change the war? It's not a single thunderclap. It's a rolling storm front. The reassurance force that shows up, the drones that never stop, the factories that don't sleep, the missiles that reach deep, the boats that escort from half a country away, the training that turns recruits into units, and the diplomacy that welds it all into a shape the Kremlin can't pry apart. When that lands together, the war stops feeling like a treadmill and starts feeling like a finish line. Picture a Russian general staff briefing the morning after a ceasefire. The map shows British-French sectors with air patrols overhead, a Black Sea corridor with mine hunters and uncrewed escorts. Raven batteries are protecting substations and bridges, an octopus line spinning interceptors faster than Shaheds can fly, shell plants whose output makes offensive surges look like bad math. The general asks, where do we probe? And for once, the answer is, not here.
That's the shock. Presence with a plan. Technology with tempo. Industry with intent. Britain doesn't have to be the biggest to be decisive. It has to be the system integrator, the ally that stitches together air policing, maritime denial, cyber resilience, training pipelines, and industrial depth so tightly that opportunism suffocates. Do that, and the Kremlin's favorite weapon, time, turns against it. Because wars end when someone changes the rules fast enough that the other side can't keep playing. Britain's most shocking move is to change the rules on purpose. And if London keeps its nerve, Europe holds its promise, and Ukraine keeps its grit, the new rules might look like this: skies that bankrupt attackers, seas that escort trade, factories that outrun attrition, and a peace held not by hope, but by hands in the room. That's a future worth betting on and building.